everyone, welcome to this TestRail webinar. The webinar is about the TestRail and Jira integration, as you already know, of course, and it's called Full Traceability for All because we're going to talk about examples of how to set up traceability using this great Jira integration. My name is Diogo Rede. I'm the solution architect and testing advocate for TestRail. So what I do is try to help everyone's experience with testing with TestRail and any other platform that integrates with TestRail. Okay, so about the actual Jira integration. Let's start from the beginning. This is a two-way integration, which is great because you can see things on both sides, so both on TestRail and on Jira, and it's a universal integration. And what does this mean? It doesn't matter if you're a TestRail cloud or server customer, you'll be able to use the integration. And it doesn't matter also your Jira setup. You can be on Jira Cloud, on Jira Server, Jira Data Center. We can connect to all of those. So it's completely irrelevant. You just need to configure the integration. And to configure it, in order for it to be two-way, what do we need? We just need the TestRail app. That's an actual app on the Placein marketplace that integrates with Jira. Like I said, Jira Cloud, Server, Data Center, all of those. You just need to go to the Placein marketplace and install it and do a quick configuration, just setting up your Jira instance details, and you will get up and running in no time. This is a preview of what you can see on each side. So on the TestRail side, what you will see are basically information about your Jira user stories, your Jira epics, etc. Whatever kind of issue you are using, you can see that information on TestRail. You can also edit that information. You can generate new issues on Jira, for instance, bugs. And on the Jira side, you'll be able to see, for instance, on this example, this is a user story, and you're able to see that you have test cases that are covering this user story. You can see the status as well on the bottom. So there's a lot more we're going to explore on our use cases. Then, how does this work? Just going a little bit more into detail, because this is usually one thing people don't understand at first. So TestRail manages testing entities. So we manage cases, we manage tests. Cases are what people call test cases, and tests are when you are actually executing a test case, so it has an aggregated result. It also manages test runs, test plans, milestones, all sorts of testing entities. While on the Jira side, what you can find are user stories, bugs, epics, sprints, any kind of entities from Jira. And we don't replicate the information on our side. We basically fetch that information from Jira. So everything is always, you always get the latest status. When you see, for instance, the status of a bug on TestRail, you're going to get the latest information because the data is fetched directly from Jira. We are not replicating or syncing anything. So this is something great to have. And for instance, cases relate to user stories because you want to cover user stories with cases. So you will see that from a coverage perspective. Tests relate to bugs because you generate bugs from the tests. So when you are submitting a test result, you are able to generate a bug which will be tied to that test. And when you see the bug on Jira, you can see the test result, you can see the steps, you can go back to the test on TestRail. And as for test runs and test plans, we try to connect those to epics because the epic is a container, which might be like a version, some sort of milestone on your development. So you can track test runs and test plans on epics and see the overall status of how your epic is being tested. So Jira is usually used in more agile environments, but it can also be tailored for waterfall. And TestRail also works in both contexts. We are methodology agnostic, basically. And what the integration does is support your process. We are not here to tell you how to work. We are not here to tell you should be agile or you should use waterfall. You can do both. We are here just to support your process and allow you to create traceability between TestRail and Jira. And who benefits from the integration? So classically on the TestRail side, you'll see testers, test leads, test managers. While on the Jira software side, you'll see product managers, developers, leads, but doesn't mean Doesn't matter whether you're in this more classical model or if you're on a more agile model where everyone works everywhere and everyone does sort of a little bit of everything. The integration will support you, and all these people will come with benefits from using this. Because product managers will be able to see how their user stories are being tested. They'll be able to track testing progress as well in order to report whether the product is ready or not. Developers will also, for instance, be able to see what test generated the bug, the test steps, etc. Managers, for instance, will be able to have an overview of, for instance, how an epic is being tested. So everyone really benefits and can make use of this integration. And we are going straight to the demonstration, to our use cases. And first of all, a little intro about the integration. So how do you set up this integration? It's very easy. So on the TestRail side, you just need to go to administration. So on the top right corner, click administration, you go to integrations, that section on the right, and you click configure integration. You just need to enter your Jira details there and you're good. Then on the Jira side, you can go to apps, and right here I already have the app installed, but you could go to explore more apps and just install the app from there, and you're good to go. So this is basically it. This is just a very short overview. Then setting up traceability with Jira. How do we do this? So usually you start everything from Jira. You have your user stories. Some are in progress. Let's imagine we are in sprint 2 of your development of your product, and you want to set up traceability between what you're developing and how you are testing it. So how can we do this? So for instance, on the login user story, we have through the Jira app, the TestRail app, we have this panel on the right side. So by opening it, you can see that no test cases in TestRail are linked to this issue because we don't have any test cases yet. And with this integration, what you can do is immediately create a new test straight from Jira, trigger the test creation. From here, you just select the project, you click add test case, and you're immediately redirected to Jira, to TestRail, where you can then start creating your first test case. Over here on the references, you can see that SA1, which, if you didn't notice, was the issue ID on the Jira story. It gets immediately populated, and here it's populated in the references field. Just a little context here. References is what we call anything which is like a development task. So for instance, in Jira, it might be an issue, it might be an epic, a story. It could be in any other platform. It could be, for instance, a requirement. So here is where you add your IDs to your requirements, to your user stories, whatever you are using. So we already have our reference in place here, and we'll start by adding a title. So for instance, it was the login story. So we're going to create a successfully login test, and we're just going to add the test case. We're not going to add any details because right here it's not relevant, and you can see the reference there again. And if you hover over the reference, you'll be able to see information that is fetched straight from Jira. So here you can see all the description from the user story, and you can even edit that user story in case you see that you have some sort of error there, some new criteria was added. You can do it directly from TestRail. Then you can also navigate to Jira, and if you go to the test cases panel again, now you can see that you have your successfully login test case over there. And if you click it, once again, you're redirected to TestRail. So after this, we need to create more test cases. So I'll show you how to quickly do that. You go to the test cases panel over here, the test cases page, repository, however you want to call it. I know people call it in different ways. And here, what we can do, well, what we can see first is that I have already configured this way, because usually when you first start in this page, you don't have the references showing on this table, but you can configure the columns that you display here. So in this case, we are displaying priority and references. And on the references link, we can also have the same functionality as on the case details view. So here you can, for instance, see the details, you can edit it, you can click and navigate to the user story as well. But what we want to do now is add more test cases, create more coverage here for our user story, and we can do that quickly using the quick outline mode from TestRail. This is one of the advantages of using a totally separate test case management tool instead of using just a Jira plugin, because from a productivity perspective and the UI simplicity, it's usually better. So right here, what we can quickly do is write a couple of test cases to cover this user story. So we can add, for instance, fail to log in with invalid email. We can also fail to log in with invalid password. Sorry, little typo there, not good. And also fail to log in with empty credentials, without credentials. And we have quickly outlined a couple of test cases here. And now we want to add our references. So TestRail allows you to do some actions in bulk. So you can just select all these test cases we've just created and just edit them. And you simply go to references. We already know that's where we put our story ID, and we just add SA1 there. And we're going to save it. And just like that, we have created a couple of test cases that are going to cover this user story. And if we navigate back to the user story and to the test cases panel, oops, it's dragging a bit there. We can now see that we have all these test cases that are creating coverage for this user story. This is how you build test coverage for your user stories and how you're able to track what test cases are covering this user story straight from the Jira plugin. So now imagine that we have fast forward a bit, and now we have like a big bunch of test cases. So we split this into functional tests, non-functional tests. We can see all the sections, all the test cases here. So a big set of test cases, a big suite of test cases here, covering quite a lot of features now, not just the login. And now we want to actually see how much coverage we are achieving with this. So we can use the TestRail reports for that, and we can use the coverage for references report. This is a report you want to use to report on test coverage on your test case design phase. So here there isn't much to this report from a configuration perspective. If you just want to quickly set it up, there's a couple of things you can do, like, well, you can select what columns you want, you can schedule it to be sent by email, etc. But if you just want to quickly test it out, you just need to use the following references option here and add all your references to the user stories you want to cover. So here it's a list. You just add one per line. And with just this configuration, we are able to check if we are covering all the user stories we want or not. So let's just scroll down. There's a couple more options here, like you can see, like scheduling, sending by email, creating HTML reports, PDF reports, etc. But let's just see the actual report we just generated. And this is a report that shows you test coverage. So we have two charts here. The left one, the reference coverage, this immediately tells you how much of your user stories you are covering. So we added 10 references when we were generating the report on that list we just used, and we can see that 7 of them are covered, while 3 of them are still not covered. So we should definitely look into this. On the right-hand chart, you can see that we added 10 references for this report, and we have 29 test cases which have references, and we have also 8 cases that don't have any reference. So maybe this is also something we should look into. We might have missed adding some reference to a test case, and that's why we are missing out on coverage. And if we then scroll down a little bit on the report, what can we see here? We can see the list of test cases that we have selected. And we can immediately see that, for instance, this user story SA6, if you click there, you will also go to Jira. We are not going to do that now, but you can immediately see that there are no test cases in this user story. So you should definitely see what's going on. You should add test cases for that user story. And if you scroll down a little bit more, you also get to see what cases don't have any reference. So you can open those cases and you can see which user story they should be covering and add the reference. And that way you'll have traceability from TestRail to Jira and vice versa as well. So this is how you can leverage TestRail's test coverage functionalities. And okay, this is the end of our first use case here. And let's jump straight to Q&A. So let me just grab my Q&A panel here and see. Wow, a lot of questions here. Thanks everyone for all the great questions. Let me see. So, okay, what is the recommended approach for approaching requirement versioning? So you have a story for a new, and in a later release, there is another story that changes the feature. Would you change the test cases and still link them to the old story, even though they don't cover the original requirements anymore? What if you have more than one release of the software in production? Okay, this is a tricky one. It's not related directly to our integration, but it does relate in some way. So here, what we usually recommend is we have one type of project which you can version. So you can have multiple versions of test cases, and that's one way you can do to actually have multiple test cases, then matching different kinds of user stories, tracking different user stories. About covering the old story or not, well, that will depend a lot on your process. So for instance, if the old user story doesn't make sense anymore, maybe you should remove the user story from whatever you're tracking. Just don't add the user story when you're trying to check for coverage. Or maybe if you still want to track you still want to cover some of the acceptance criteria, maybe update the user story as well. This is usually a big challenge, which is not just related to testing, but also to product management, because as you develop more and more stories, some of them get deprecated, and you need to be careful managing that and managing your test cases as well. So that must be like a joint effort from product and quality assurance. Okay, then let me find some more questions here. Steps to generate a requirement traceability matrix report. I am aware of coverage for references report, but it provides only partial traceability. Okay, I'm looking for full traceability, epic stories, test results, bugs. Okay, so there are a couple of reports you can explore here. You have this test coverage report. So test coverage report is mostly for when you are doing test design, but then when you are actually executing your tests, once again, this is something we are going to show just after this on this next use case. But what you can do is make use of other types of reports. So on the results section, there's also a references report that will show you. You can just if you're tracking your tests in a milestone, you can just select all tests from that milestone with using a filter where you just select the milestone, and then from there you'll get a report where you get all the tests that are covering that milestone. So if that milestone is related to that epic, you'll be able to then see how much of the epic is being covered. Also for bugs, there's also on the defects section, there's a report that will tell you the latest status of the bugs for each test case, so you can see if you have test cases that are still being impacted by bugs. This is also a very broad answer, very generic answer. Sorry about that, but maybe you'll be a little more enlightened after the next use case. So can we integrate TestRail with Jira at org level, not project to project? I'm not sure what you mean by at org level, not project to project, but the configuration, let me share my screen here real quick so it's more visual. So this one here. Okay, so if you go to administration on Jira, what you'll be able to see in the integration section is that you can configure your defects and references, and you can override it by project here. As for organization, I'm not sure what you intend here, but if you can configure it by project, you can most likely do it. Yeah, you can configure it at organization level. So for the whole instance, you have a generic configuration, and then if you need to override for one project or another, here are the examples of projects that are overriding this configuration. So you can do it either project by project or for the whole instance. I hope this helps answer your question. I wonder about how to reference a test case that was pre-existing. So yeah, if the test case already exists, like we've demonstrated, you just go to your test cases. This is like the most basic workflow. So you just go to your test cases page. For instance, I have successfully logged in, and you can just edit the test case and add your reference here on this field over here. So I hope that was your question. So let me check this one out as well. If Jira ticket was moved to another project and changed the name, the TestRail reference gets broken. Is there a best practice how to manage it? We've been updating it manually, but it causes quite a lot of pain since it's not obvious and out of sync with Jira. Well, yeah, this is by design. We use references so we can so we track things directly from Jira. We don't bring any other sort of data. We don't sync data inside TestRail. So this is a limitation. What you can try to do is create a script through our API to actually update all the references in sort of a more automated fashion instead of manually changing everything. So please check out our API. But this is something that we can't really. It's not technically possible. Let's put it that way, to actually guess what the new reference is from Jira. So yeah, my best advice here is use our API and try to fetch that information automatically after you have migrated. For instance, by story name, you can also create some sort of mapping file, something like that. And I see a lot of questions related to actual execution. So let's jump into the next use case, and then I'll pick up any questions I can from these as well. So planning test execution for full traceability. So imagine that we have now created all our test cases. We have all our test cases set up here on our test cases repository, quite a few test cases, like we've seen on the previous example. We have set our priority here, so we can do our risk-based approach when planning tests, and we have our references in place for all test cases, and we can see here the information from Jira once again. So let's start planning out our actual test execution, so we can actually cover everything we want and make sure our testing process is aligned with our product. So for instance, on Jira, what we can do is track development using epics. That's a fairly common thing to do. So here in this example, we are using this epic called account MVP v1. So this would be the first version, the first MVP or minimum viable product. That's the meaning for MVP for whoever isn't familiar with it. And we're going to track it using an epic here. So this epic is basically a container for user stories, bugs, etc. And you can set the objective. You can see the objectives for this epic is the login screen, the Google and Facebook authentication, homepage, and user details. This is what we are going to release on our first version. And we have all the user stories that we need to complete to accomplish this goal. So it goes from login to the homepage, to accessibility, to all that. So what we need to do is quickly start planning this on TestRail. So we can do this using milestones. Milestones are the highest container you can use on TestRail. So a milestone is sort of the analog of an epic on TestRail. So we are going to actually track this epic with a milestone. So we just go to the milestones page and you start by adding the new milestone. Here we're just going to call the milestone MVP v1 final tests, and we are going to reference our epic on the references. So SA14, that was the idea of the epic, and we can also add an end date so we can track our testing progress and make sure we end testing on time. So this is our goal, to test that epic within this timeline. So let's quickly open the milestone we just created. And as you can see, the milestone shows some progress information. So here you can see that currently there is no no progress. The milestone was just created, but you can see the chart here, the pie chart. You can see there are a couple of statuses, but there are still no test runs. So the next step is actually first you can see that there's the reference to the epic on the top right corner. You can see the information from the epic once again here directly on TestRail. You don't need to navigate to the epic. You can also edit the information if you want to, or you can even navigate to the epic. And now that we have the reference on our milestone, if you scroll all the way down, we want to test all these user stories within that milestone. And you can see on the TestRail results panel, if you go to the milestones tab, you can see that this epic is now being tracked by this milestone. And you can also see the progress straight from Jira. Whoever doesn't want to go to TestRail, for instance, if you're a manager, if you're a product owner, and you just want to have an overview, you can have it directly from this screen without requiring to go into TestRail. But we need to plan our tests, so we need to go back to TestRail, and that's what we are going to do once again. So we're just going to click the MVP link there, the milestone link there, and we're going to start planning creating our plans, our runs as well. For that, we just need to go to the test runs and results page, and we will start by adding a test plan. We're going to name it cross-browser test plan. We want to test our app in Chrome and Safari as well. So this is going to be our test plan. And we are also going to add the reference to the epic on this test plan because we want to also track it directly from Jira on that screen. And we are going to say it belongs to our MVP v1 final test milestone. So everything is linked to each other, and it's easier to navigate from one place to the other. It's easier to filter, etc. And like you've just seen, I just added a test run from the right-hand panel. I just clicked Add Test Run, and now we are going to work with configurations. Configurations are a neat little feature from TestRail. Here is where you say your testing conditions. So here we are going to say we want to test on different web browsers. We are going to use Chrome and Safari, but this could be, for instance, an operating system, a mobile device, whatever condition or variable you want to test. You can use this to quickly have multiple test runs for all your testing conditions. So just click OK. And now we're going to click that link that says description, references, and data, because we also want to add the reference to our epics. So we want everything linked. We want full traceability here. And we are going to add our test plan. Once again, you can see on the top right panel the references, and it has a reference to our epic. And on our epic, we will now be able to see that we have visibility over our test plans. So here you can see the test plan. You can even see the test runs that are inside the test plan. And you can see our runs as well. And if you expand the run, you can even see what the test cases, what are the test cases that are going to be executed in this run, what their latest result was, and you could even expand further into the actual test result. So this provides you with full visibility. So right now just in this epic, whoever opens this epic, doesn't matter who you are, if you're on Jira, and you have you actually need to have a TestRail license as well. But you can see it right here. You can see your milestone progress. You want to refine it and see your plans progress, and then you can also see your cases your runs and your cases latest status, your test latest status. Now back to TestRail, we are going to start executing our test plan. We'll start by the test run that we target, where we are targeting Chrome. And when we open this test run, what we can immediately see are our test steps for our first test case. This is also a cool view from TestRail. We have this fast track lane here, so it's a 3-pane view. And from this middle line, you can immediately see the test steps, and you can also add the results. So let's imagine that we are going to test this. We have tested this successfully login scenario, and it failed. We can quickly add a comment here. So let's say we were just unable to log in, and we can even set the status by test step. So perhaps the insert credentials step we were able to execute, but then when we clicked submit and we expected to successfully log in, maybe we couldn't actually log in. And we can also enter some data about what actually happened. So I'm going to say there was a backend error page that was displayed. So we are creating all this data, like I mentioned earlier. All this data is managed within TestRail. This is not in Jira, but with the integration, we'll be able to also see this information in Jira, like we are going to see just in a while. And since the test failed, we will also want to report a defect, so someone can actually fix whatever is happening with this scenario. And we can do it directly from this button, this push button on the defects field. We can do it directly from within TestRail without having to actually navigate to Jira and creating a bug there. So let's submit a bug here. Let's call it backend error on login. You can select your issue type here. So for instance, if you have an issue type that is not bug, maybe it's defect or it's some particular type of bug, you can also select this. The values on this field are fetched directly from Jira, so everything's always the latest. You can also add the epic, so you have this defect immediately also associated to the epic, and you can track it from there. And there are a couple of other properties you could add. There's also a predefined template on the defect, so all this information related to test information, the test steps, case information as well. Everything will be on the description. You can customize this on your administration page because it might be too much information. So feel free to do that and have it suited to your best needs. You could also attach a file that would also be attached to Jira, to your defect on Jira, but right now let's just submit this defect. Another way you could do it, if you like, just one important detail, the Jira ID is immediately populated on the defects field, so you don't need to worry about that. So the defect is created, and you immediately have the defect associated to this test result, so you don't need to do anything else, just submit the result. But just in case you actually want to use the Jira interface, you can also click the add button here, the add link, and you'll be redirected to Jira. And here you can just create your Jira bug as you would create, well, if you were in Jira already, it's exactly the same. It just shows you the Jira screens, you're inside Jira. But right now, this was just for a demonstration. Right now, let's just add the result. We already have the defect created in Jira, so we are okay. So now we can see that the test failed. We have our test comment there, unable to log in. We have the steps marked as, the first one marked as passed, the second one failed, and we have our defect reference there. And like we can see all the details from this defect. And imagine that you forgot to add some sort of information to the defect. You can do it directly from TestRail. So let's say I want to add a note that there was a JavaScript error on the console logs. I can just do that straight from TestRail, and I don't need to bother going to Jira and making any changes there. It's immediately reflected on Jira. And if we go to Jira, we can see exactly that. Since this bug was created from the context of a test result in TestRail, it will be immediately associated on the Jira plugin to this bug, and you can see that you have this test, which is successfully login that failed. And if you click on the arrow there, you can expand it, and you can actually see all the steps, you can see the actual result, you can see the comment and able to log in on the top as well. You can see to which test run it belongs to, the milestone, the project, etc. And also some other details you may want to add, some extra details you may want to add on your test. So this is great, for instance, for a developer who doesn't want to be navigated back and forth between Jira and TestRail. He will immediately have the bug, and he will immediately also have on the same screen, he will have details on how this bug was found. What were the test steps? What's the test evidence? What was the actual result? Where was this being tested, on Chrome or Safari or whatever? So you don't have to worry about inputting all that information again on Jira, and the developer can see that information immediately straight from TestRail. So this is a very powerful integration. And we are now going back to TestRail, and once again we have fast forwarded, and we have all our test results in. We can see some tests passed, well, most tests passed actually. Some tests are blocked, some need to be retested, some failed. And this is one way to see testing progress. Another way is, for instance, if you go to the right-hand panel and you click the defects view, you'll also be able to check on progress and application health, because right here what we will be able to see is the bugs that were reported. So we have a couple of bugs here. We have the references to the Jira bugs, so you can also immediately navigate to those references. Once again, you can see the information directly on TestRail. You can also edit that information on TestRail. And one important thing as well is that you can see the actual status of the bugs. So you know whether the bugs were already fixed, whether they're on the backlog, they're in progress, they're done. So if all the bugs are in a done status, probably you want to retest these scenarios and see if the bug was fixed or not. So this is also a very good indicator of your current testing progress and what you should do next as well. Then on the Jira side, what can we see? We can go once again to our TestRail results panel here, and we can see on the milestone, we can see all the testing progress for that milestone. We can see all the tests that are passing, that are blocked, that need to be retested, that failed. And if you want some more granular information, you can go to plans. So on plans, you can see the information by plan. We just have one plan, so it's only showing one here. You can also see the test runs there. And if you want more information on the test runs, you can go to the runs tab. And on the runs tab, you have some more detailed information. Oops, this went a little bit too fast. Sorry about that. So we can have more information. We can even see the test statuses there. So a lot to go here. And if you go to one of the user stories, okay, it just loaded. And if you go to the TestRail results panel, you can see that you have, since you have the reference on the test cases, you can immediately see the latest results for each test case. So you have the history of the results for this particular user story. And you can also see, you also have that nice view where you can see what failed, what were the actual results. So you have all this historical context. So you know, for instance, if you have a lot of failed tests for one user story, then maybe you should alert your development team that this feature isn't particularly stable. And finally, what do we want to see when we are about to end our test cycle? We want to assess our execution coverage. So to do that, we can once again make use of our reporting capabilities in TestRail. And for this particular goal, you should use the comparison for references report. That's on the results section. And here you need to worry about, well, mainly about two things. So one of them is the references you want to check for coverage. So to check those references, you need to input the Jira IDs here. So once again, select the following references only, and you just input the references there. Just so you know, the difference between all references and the following references only is that if you select all references, what's going to happen is that it's going to pick all references which are on which are referenced on your test cases. So if you have a user story that isn't referenced on any test case, you won't be tracking that. So you need to actually input the list to check for full coverage. And the other configuration you also need to set is on the sections and test runs. This will select the test runs that we want to check that are covering our Epic user stories. So we can, since we are tracking everything inside the milestone, we can just filter all the test runs by milestone. So we select the MVP v1 milestone, and we just filter the test runs this way, and you can just immediately generate the report. That's what we are going to do. We add the report, and we now have our comparison for references report here, and we can see this chart. This chart has basically it's all the runs that are contained in the milestone. So you can see the test run for Chrome, you can see the test run for Safari and its progress or its results, and you can also see the combined results on the right side, which gives you basically the coverage. Usually this is best used if you have more than one test cycle instead of, as opposed to having more than one test run in different periods of time instead of having configurations. But it's always good to have this information. Then if we scroll down, we can see the test runs once again that are considered for this report actually. And if you scroll further down, what you can see is an overview of all the results. So you have a list of the test cases. Actually, you have first on the left, you have the references, and then you have the test cases that are covering each reference. So for instance, for SA1, you have a couple of test cases there, 5 test cases. You can see that some are failing on Chrome and they're passing on Safari. So we should probably look into that. But we can not only see that and have a global overview of things, as well as we can see that, for instance, SA6 is not being covered by any test case. So we are missing out on coverage here, and we should definitely look into this. So yeah, this is basically what you get with the Jira integration. Is you have visibility over in TestRail to your Jira entities. On Jira, you can track test progress from a high level perspective, and then you can generate this sort of reports that give you that basically give you the final coverage. So you want to probably adjust your testing to achieve full coverage if possible, of course. And this was it for our use cases. And now we are going back to Q&A. We have 7 minutes, maybe 10 if you want to stay for a couple more minutes, and I'll just jump straight into our Q&A panel again. Once again, a lot of questions there. So let me try and pick some up real quick here. How do you set up the integration for a company without specifying one email address to be used? What does entering the email do? Well, you actually have to set an email. Usually you would have, you can have more than one account. But usually what you do is have, what we recommend is that you have sort of a service account, and that account would be the account that integrates with your Jira instance. So everyone on your TestRail instance can leverage the Jira integration without being on Jira. We have added our integration on the TestRail side. When we try to push defect from TestRail, we always see certain fields in the dropdown unavailable to select. We cannot seem to switch these off or edit them to match Jira. So, okay, let me share my screen and maybe try to help you out with this one. And okay, so what you may want to do regarding defect fields is if you come to the integrations, and then let's see the administration area. So what you can do is just select which fields you want to see. You can't actually filter the values inside the fields. I think that's what you are trying. We always see certain fields in the dropdown and available to select. Yeah, because sometimes you may have some some logic on Jira side that we can't understand on the TestRail side. So, well, the best you can do is probably just try to hide those fields if they are not mandatory. This is actually my best advice. That there isn't much we can do to actually guess the logic behind your fields in Jira. How can we collect the results trend for our test cases to see what cases failed or were blocked in the past? Okay, this is more related to reporting. You can probably look at our reporting documentation. We have released that not so long ago, but if my memory doesn't fail me, there are a couple of reports. I usually need to look into each one of them when I'm trying to do this sort of thing. But what you can usually do is use a status stops, and this sort of report usually gives you the kind of information you're looking for. So this report would give you, for instance, would tell you which test cases usually pass the most, which test cases usually are blocked the most, etc. So you can act on those test cases, because that's usually things you want to look at. If a test case is failing a lot, you'll probably want to see if it's a problem with test case design, if it's within your feature, so you can use that. Okay. Can we link test cases to individual acceptance criteria, or is the relationship at story level? Actually, the relationship from TestRail to Jira is at story level, because we need the ID for the story. So, for instance, usually the acceptance criteria on Jira is just text, and it's not an entity we can actually track. You could have probably a separate field that would where you could say I'm tracking this acceptance criteria, but then you wouldn't have a way to actually track it. There is the opposite actually. So you could, for instance, imagine if you want one test step to cover one user story, and then another test step to cover another user story. We do have that on TestRail, but not for the acceptance criteria, because, like I just mentioned, it's not an actual entity on Jira. If it was an entity, maybe we could track it, but that's not the case. So no, right now there's no way to do that. So when trying to open TestRail case, we get below, even when logged into TestRail. We are not yet logged into TestRail. Please log in to use the integration. If you have your integration properly set up and you actually have a valid TestRail account, then that might be an issue. So I would suggest that you contact our customer support and report the issue. So maybe they can help you with that. But please try to see if there's no issue with your configuration first. If your TestRail account is actually working as it should. Because that's one constraint. You need to have a TestRail account to actually see the information on Jira. So yeah, please, if it's an actual issue, please get in touch with support. Okay, so is there a mean to actually utilize the TestRail panel within Jira to see results and comments and document results and comments? Well, right now, no, there isn't. So what we are aiming for here is not to have the testing process inside Jira. So inside Jira, you would have visibility into the testing process, but we want people to actually testers to actually work on TestRail, because that's where we can provide a clean interface, a simple interface to be used. But I see how that could be helpful sometimes, but we believe that testing inside the testing tool is what actually brings value. So no, right now that is not possible to do. You can see the results, you can see the comments, you can see everything, but you can't actually edit or enter more information straight from Jira. Can I connect user story, Epic, Jira to test suite? So depends on what you mean by test suite. We don't have the concept of test suite in TestRail. What we do have are sections, and the sections are just basically organizers, and we can't actually add anything here. we could add it on the description, but that wouldn't do much good when it comes to traceability. What you can do is add the epic or the user story at the test run or the test plan level, like we've just demonstrated on this use case. So what else? So this is not related, but how can we copy steps from one test case to other test cases? Well, you can reference the test steps, or you can use shared test steps. So you can, when you're creating a test, you can actually select. If you're using the separated steps template, you can actually grab steps that exist in a different test. If we want to do multiple runs over time, checking your login checks every sprint, do we need to go and change the references every time? Well, no, the references should remain the same. You just select the test cases, and if the test cases have the references in place, then you should be good. You don't need to add references again. You just add for instance, what you can do is if you have a test run, this is something we usually recommend, is, for instance, we already have this test plan. For instance, you did execute this test plan during one of your sprints, and now you want to, on the next sprint, you want to do some regression and you want to check the login. What you can do is use the rerun functionality, and what it does is that it copies everything. Well, actually the reference wasn't copied, but you can do this, and you just add your reference here, and you can just add the test plan, and you have your regression in place, like really fast. I'm just going to end to wrap up the webinar now. Just quickly share my screen again. And okay, this is the end of the webinar. And thanks everyone for being there with me. Thanks for bearing with some of the not so fun times here. And I hope you enjoyed, and that some of your doubts regarding the integration are now a little bit cleared. And well, hope to see you again in a future webinar. Enjoy your day, everyone. Bye.